Welcome aboard.
Please welcome to the stage Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey.
This is an exciting event, the path toward American-made autonomous vehicles. We're going to get into all the policy issues, which I know will keep you awake here at 8 a.m. If that doesn't, though, after the main stage conversation, stick around to see the Cruise Origin AV vehicle just around the way. I don't think you can get a ride today, but maybe next time. So let's dive into this. Our next guest is the co-founder of the Autonomous Vehicle Caucus. Please welcome to the stage Congressman Bob Latta.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So the Congressional Autonomous Vehicle Caucus. What do you do in this caucus? Are you having parties like burning driver's licenses or something?
Well, much more exciting. We're going to try to get people out in vehicles that are safer and into the next area that people can know that they have vehicles that can get them delivered. It's important because, when we talk about AVs, first of all, when we did the legislation in the 115th Congress, one of the things I said, we wanted to have vehicles out there that were as safe or safer than anything that was on the road. And so when you think about what we want to get done now is we want to make sure that we have vehicles that can make sure we have the cybersecurity, that we're meeting everything that we're doing right now on a vehicle, especially when you think of the coverage that we have to have. And so we have, one of the things I talk about is you have to have preemption. You can't have 50 states in the District of Columbia all having their own regulations out there and laws on the books, because just think it this way, I'm from Ohio. You're up originally from Michigan. If I'm driving just north about 25 miles from my house heading toward Michigan, the car could say, well, you can't, we're going to have to shut off the autonomous vehicle mode because you can't do this in Michigan. So we want to make sure that as we look at the commerce, that the vehicles are moving across it. So when we think about autonomous vehicles also on the safety end, that, when we think about right now that over 43,000 people died in traffic accidents in this country in the last year, and unfortunately the problem is it's not going down, it's going up. 94% of all the accidents that are caused out there are driver error. It's not the vehicle, it's the driver. And what's the big problem we have today? Everybody's on their cell phones, they're texting or something else. So we got to by having these vehicles, we'll have it much safer for drivers out there. And at the same time, we can help people that have a disability. My mom had a severe eye issue that they told her she'd be blind by the time she was 25, and she quit pretty much any type of driving when I was 16, and so she was dependent on other people. So all these things that we can do with an autonomous vehicle is what we want to get done in the caucus.
So you mentioned I'm from Michigan, that's true. My greatest accomplishment was covering General Motors for the Detroit Free Press without ever knowing how to drive a stick shift, so, which is probably typical for an older millennial, but how long until no one knows how to drive an automatic transmission?
Well, when you think about where we are, the different levels, and a lot of people don't realize that we're in level 2s right now. Because if you watch any TV at night or whenever that you watch an auto commercial and you see cars parking, the self-park, making sure on the braking end, staying within the lanes, all those things are being built in the vehicles right now, and people don't even realize that we're talking about self-drive. Right. But it's really important is also, especially when we talk about the self-drive caucus, that we do this in the United States. We want to develop the technology here. Because right now, if you look at California, of the 7 companies out there testing, 3 are from China. And so we want to make sure that the technology is homegrown right here in the United States.
So I remember at least 3 presidential administrations ago covering the Detroit Auto Show, and whoever the transportation secretary at the time said we need to avoid having a patchwork of regulations throughout the country on autonomous vehicles. And you just mentioned that. So what is taking so long?
Well, we were very fortunate. In the 115th Congress, I led the effort on our side of the aisle. And when we had over 300 staff meetings, 300. We listened to everybody. We went out, we were talking to industry, we were talking to organizations, groups, everybody. We're all at the table. We worked with our friends on the side of the aisle, with the Democrats, with Debbie Dingell from Michigan, a good friend. And so, we worked the legislation, we got it put together, and I serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and this is the committee that the legislation went through. We got a unanimous vote coming out of committee, which is unheard of, to be able to get that done. And on the floor, it was actually voiced. But over in the Senate, we had a situation, I can say, with the trial attorneys. And so that's pretty much where it ended. So but we've got to keep this going, because we're so 2 Congresses behind where we were. But we want to get this legislation moving again, getting it passed, signed into law, so America will be the leader in autonomous vehicles.
Do you think that you can get that done this year?
I'm an eternal optimist, and because you wouldn't be doing this job if you weren't. Yeah. But we have a lot of good people working on this, and again, we've got with Debbie on her side of the aisle and me, that we have, and I know when we had our first caucus meeting with just outside groups, I couldn't believe it. We were in a committee hearing, had to run upstairs back and forth. We had over 85 different groups being represented at that, and it was a tremendous success, and it just shows there's so much interest in it. But the one thing that we have to always remember is where we were several years ago, we're not there anymore. Because one of the things I ask everyone when we're working on the legislation is first question, are you where you thought you'd be 5 years ago? And everybody said the exact same thing. No, we're much farther ahead. So the technology keeps evolving and changing. And so as we look at what we want to put together in legislation today, we have to think about all the different changes that have occurred just in those 4 years.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned, the subtext of this conversation is the 43,000 people who died in crashes last year, like you said. That's 10,000 more than the all-time low about a decade ago. So this is a public health crisis, but it feels like we don't treat it that way. Do you think that members of Congress understand this is a health crisis?
I'm not sure if they look at it truly as a health crisis, but it's really a safety crisis, is the way I look at it. Because again, the trend should be that as automobiles became safer, you should see your traffic accidents and deaths going down. But again, because of distractions out there, I ride with the Highway Patrol every year. It's a good thing to go out with them, and the things that they point out. But then again, if you're on the road, I've seen people eat. It's healthy, but eating a salad and driving is not a very safe thing.
I don't eat salad at all, so that's not a problem.
Yeah, no. But that's a problem we run into. I put a lot of miles on a car in a year, everything from reading newspapers to reading books. But it's that cell phone in front of them is what's really the big issue that we have today.
So obviously the Cruise Origin, which is sitting over here, that's going to be a vehicle where you will be able to read a newspaper, eat a salad, because there's no steering wheel. But that's going to be a policy issue that has to be addressed in Congress. And I know that part of what the automakers want to see is, first off, a significant increase in the number of AVs they can test on the road. I think they're capped at 2,500 right now. Do you feel okay having more than that? Is that okay?
Well, again, if you're going to be testing, you got to make sure you know what you have out there. And I know that in some cases, I've talked to companies, at that 2,500 threshold to go up to 10,000. But I think the important thing is we want to have the legislation done, because one of the things that we don't have is, again, maybe some short-term thing. Okay, this is up the number for right now. But again, we've got to get the American companies and get the American technology out there, because again, as I said, when you think about 3 out of the 7 companies testing right now are from China. Again, I think that kind of shows, because they want to not only be, the leader in AV, EV, and everything else. We want to make sure that Americans know that on this, because like in Ohio, we have the Transportation Research Center, which is an incredible place. All the testing, they have an incredible testing site for the entire United States and the auto companies and anybody who's out there. But when you look at what they're doing and can do, again, it's here. We want to have it, because again, when we think of on the cyber side, we want to make sure that people are, I've had people say, well, I don't want to get in my car and have it fly off a cliff. Somebody take control of it. And so we want people, when they get in the vehicle, to know it. And I've ridden an EV, and AVs, and that, it's one of the things several years back when I got in, the gentleman said, okay, there's a brake on your side, just don't touch it when the car is running. And your instinct is to put your foot on the brake because the car's driving itself on 395.
Yeah.
And all I thought after I got out of the car, I wish I had that brake when I was teaching my kids how to drive.
No, I remember the first time I rode in a self-driving car per se. It was an Uber vehicle in 2016, and this was long before they were really ready for testing that, but we're not going to get into that. Let's talk about the commercial vehicle element of this, and there is concern among people about how this could affect jobs, and trucking jobs, for example, people who drive a vehicle for a living. Is that something that you're worried about? Where do those people go to get a job after this happens?
Well, it's something we talked about when we did our legislation back in the 115th, and again, we only go up to 10,000 pounds in our committee, so we're pretty much just talking about your light trucks and automobiles,
Passenger cars.
and so anything over that go to over the transportation. But at the same time, when you're talking about jobs, there's going to be so many jobs out there. Just the analysis, because you're going to have people servicing the vehicles and all the other things that go along with it. That you're not probably going to have a lot of displacement, because just on the heavy side, I come from an area that we do that 60% of the United States population can be reached within one day's drive in my home county. And one of the things we all know is this, on the trucking side, that we're going to hit a wall in 5 years. We're not going to have enough truck drivers in this country. Then how are we going to deliver product and goods across the country?
Sure.
So these are all the things we need to be thinking about. But on our side, it's just anything that 10,000 and less that on the smaller, so you're talking about maybe your Ubers, deliveries, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's at least a thought that maybe a truck driver transitions to be a cargo security person or something like that, because all of a sudden, all the bad guys out there are going to think I can steal stuff from the car because there's nobody in it. So, I mean, it feels like there may be opportunities there.
I think there's a lot of opportunities for when you think about anything on the self-drive side, because again, we've got to make sure that we're leading, but at the same time, just the demographics of our country, it's an older country that we live in today by population. And again, if you can have individuals out there not being stuck at home, being able to have that mobility, because at some point in time people say, I just can't drive anymore. And if you live in an area that don't have any type of public transportation, which is large parts of our country and parts of my district, there's nothing there. So all of a sudden you then become dependent on somebody else. Then some people say, well, I don't want to be a burden on you. I don't want to have to call you to get me from point A to point B. But just the thought that you can have a vehicle pick you up, or if you own one, you get it and tell it where to go, and off you go.
Yeah. So I'm old enough to remember in Congress when the Chevy Volt was introduced and there was a fire, and it was a big deal in Congress, and it was people were called to the carpet, and there was heavy criticism, and members of Congress, I'm afraid to say, did some grandstanding, which is shocking. And the reality was that there was going to be some fires in EVs, just like there are fires in gas vehicles. So I make that point to ask about AVs, about autonomous vehicles. When we get to the point where there's some of these on the road, there's going to be an incident at some point. Is Congress going to be able to handle that?
Well, when you think about the 40,000 people that were killed in traffic accidents today, and take that number, and you're going to say about every one of them was because you were driving yourself, or you hit somebody with the person that was driving the vehicle. So I think that one of the things we have to look at is how can we avoid the accidents? And again, when you look at how much these vehicles have changed just in the last 4 years on the technology side, they're getting more things built in them to make them safer. And one of the things I know I've talked with folks on the AV side is, how many accidents. I've seen some of the reports, but pretty much what you're seeing is it's people driving other vehicles running into their vehicles. Mm-hmm. So it's not it's not that the AV's running into things. And of course, are these things infallible? No. You're going to have accidents. You're going to have accidents in everything. And so the first thing you got to do is just like think back with the first time with the Wright brothers. If you think about the early flight and the accidents that occurred there, you say, well, we shouldn't fly. Well, that we all got in planes and we still fly today.
Sure.
So I think it's important that we see in these vehicles vehicles that they're going to be, as I've said, we want them as safe or safer than anything out there on the road today.
Well, it just feels like the transition is the hardest part, that to go from 0 to 100. If we could go there overnight, we would do it. But how do we culturally get through the tougher times when people don't know if they can trust one of these things?
Well, and again, I think it's by having the vehicles being tested, and the more the testing is going on, the more people will be able to get in and be in those vehicles, that I think they'll find that, yeah, these things are safe, or could be very safer because the vehicle knows this, for braking purposes and everything else. So, one of the things that also come up with AVs that I've always said is important, because like Columbus, Ohio has been designated a city that, a lot of things can happen as going into the future. But just think, if everybody's car was, let's just say you're in a 35 or 40 mile an hour zone, all the cars are going the same speed. The car will know when it needs to get off, so you're not going to have traffic jams. You're going to save energy, because all of a sudden these vehicles aren't going to be stop and go, stop and go. You're going to have a steady stream going. And then also, that when you have a smart city out there, you'll be able to have the traffic lights be able to identify that, okay, there's nobody waiting at these intersections, just keep the stream going. So you'll have a much better flow. So, instead of getting into a 2-hour tie-up out here in Washington, you might be able to get in here in 20, 25 minutes.
See, I do like the sound of that. Okay, at Axios, we like to end with one fun thing. Will you miss driving?
It depends what time of the day it is. I tell you, when you're out on the far end of your district and you got maybe almost a 2-hour drive home, no. I'll be very happy to have that vehicle get me home without me sitting behind the wheel thinking I got to stay awake.
That sounds good to me. Congressman Latta, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Introducing Axios transportation correspondent Joanne Muller.
Well, good morning, everyone. Hello, and happy that you're all here. I cover transportation for Axios, so this topic is something I deal with a lot every day. Our next guest is the senator from my own home state of Michigan, who's going to give us a little bit of perspective on what's happening on the Senate side here. Please welcome Michigan Senator Gary Peters.
Hello.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Yeah, good to see you.
Well, we heard a little bit earlier from Representative Latta about the toll that is taken on our roads. 40,000, I think it was 43,000 killed last year. It's really unacceptable. And so autonomous vehicles can help with that, and also with accessibility issues. But I know you also see it as kind of a national security issue. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, but let me first start with the safety, because to me that is the principal reason that we need to focus on this technology. As you said, 43,000 people is carnage, and then just think of the debilitating injuries, which goes to a number vastly larger than that. It's just unacceptable that that's happening on our highways. And we know even before we get to fully autonomous vehicles on our highways, the technologies that get us there will also save lives along the way. So this is a continuum that will continue to impact people's lives in a very real way. So I think that should be our major focus. But from a competitive standpoint, there's no question that it is absolutely essential that this technology get developed here and deployed here in the United States. We're facing significant international competition from other countries that understand that autonomy represents the future of mobility. Not only the future of mobility, but it drives other technologies in a significant way. As one engineer told me, that basically self-driving cars is the moonshot for artificial intelligence, that when AI is able to process the massive amount of data that comes in from all of those sensors and drive a vehicle safely through New York City or Washington, D.C., that means AI has developed a significant degree. And that'll give a competitive advantage in just about every industry there is that country is involved in. We know the Chinese, for example, are investing massive amounts of money in AI. They understand that from a economic competitive standpoint. They want to be the center of AI. They want to be the center of mobility. They're testing their vehicles right now, and many companies are testing those vehicles here in the United States. They're developing that technology, and I want to make sure that we are at the forefront of that and are the economic leader, especially from Michigan, to make sure that our domestic automakers are at the forefront of that is critical for jobs and critical for us to make sure that our technology is cutting edge globally.
You know, and really, you mentioned it, the technology was invented here. The leading companies are here. The Chinese are testing here. And yet, we feel this risk. What is China doing? What is it about China that they are doing that we are not doing in the U.S. and we should be doing?
Well, they're allowing the innovation to move forward, get them on the road. And so that's what we have to do. We have to be able to put a regulatory framework in place so that we can scale up and make sure that our auto manufacturers can scale to a level that makes economic sense for them, also allows them to collect more data. The more vehicles you get on the road, the more information you get, the more that you can design those systems in order to handle a variety of conditions that you're going to have. So I think that the impediment we have right now is the fact we don't have that kind of regulatory certainty for auto companies in the United States to go beyond the testing phase and start scaling up. Mm-hmm. The Chinese can do that in China a lot easier. They can scale up in China because their regulatory system, let's say, works a whole lot differently than what we have here in the United States, which gives them a competitive advantage in that respect. I think we have a competitive advantage with the quality of our engineers, and the ability to innovate in this country is absolutely unparalleled. But we've got to make sure that the regulatory framework allows that to flourish in a way that also is safe. Going back to our initial comments, we want to make sure we're deploying these in a safe manner as well. Mm-hmm.
Well, you were a co-sponsor of the AV START Act, which I think was all the way back in 2017. Yeah. There was similar legislation on the House side. Nothing has passed through Congress yet. Do you see an opportunity now, given the heightened interest in AI, you were involved with the CHIPS Act, for instance, is there a heightened opportunity to get this legislation finally passed?
Well, I don't know if the legislation will I don't think it'll look like what we had in 2017. We've had a lot of discussions with folks since then. So things are evolving. I think we need to look at every possible avenue to put forward a plan that'll give some certainty for folks as to what the regulatory environment will look like, whether it's legislation, whether it's rulemaking, whether it's other actions that the Department of Transportation can take. I talk to Secretary Buttigieg on a regular basis about this subject. He usually knows if I'm calling. One of the items I'm going to bring up will be self-driving cars. There'll be other ones I'll probably talk to him about, but that will be there. And they've made meaningful steps. They're looking at having an Office of Automation and other things that are coming along the lines that I think are very important. But clearly, folks understand that this has to get done, but there are other people that have concerns. I heard the discussion earlier about jobs. Obviously, folks are concerned about the employment impact of this. People are concerned if you get self-driving cars out too quickly, is that a safety concern? I mean, these are serious issues that need to be addressed, and we're working aggressively right now to try to navigate that and figure out what is the best path for us to move forward, because time is not on our side. The longer it takes to get that kind of regulatory certainty, you're going to see companies perhaps back off on these significant investments, and if they do that, that will put us behind a considerable degree, and it'll be really tough to try to catch up.
So it sounds like you expect more progress to happen quicker on the rulemaking side rather than legislation.
I don't know, because rulemaking is not easy either. So I don't know if it's that either. But we're looking at a variety of avenues right now pretty aggressively.
Well, tell me some of these ideas. You mentioned an Office of Automation in the DOT. What would that look like?
Well, it starts to coordinate the information about automation, what that's going to mean, what sort of things that we need to be doing. You're seeing the Department of Transportation did change a rule on crashworthiness, for example, that says that, you can demonstrate crashworthiness without having a human being involved, which is important because human being, self-driving cars not driving the car with brakes and steering wheel. So that is a rulemaking that is a step in the direction of where we have to go in thinking about automobiles as not just human-centric, but perhaps much broader than that. And so I think you could continue to go down some of those avenues. But ultimately, you have to bring some certainty that auto manufacturers know that they can produce more of these vehicles and put more of these vehicles on the road, which I fully support.
Right. Well, we've seen the Cruise robo-taxi in the back room. Zoox has a similar driverless, purpose-built robo-taxi. Others are working on them. Waymo has shown one. All of these vehicles currently do not meet the federal motor vehicle safety standards. And I'm wondering, do you think that the robo-taxis should be designed to meet those laws, or should the laws be changed for these new class of vehicles?
Well, some of it's because they don't meet it because they don't have a human. They don't have brake pedals and steering wheels and things of that nature. So clearly that has to
Probably don't
change.
need windshield wipers either, right?
Probably not. Would you unless you make sure your cameras are
Sensors are
are
clean,
working,
yeah.
and make sure that they're not impeded in any way. But actually, this technology is clearly here and it's working in a good way. And I think legislators need to be exposed to that. I'm glad the vehicle is here. I think we need to demonstrate that more. I had the opportunity to ride. I've ridden in self-driving cars for quite a few years, but the first time actually in a commercial setting with Cruise. It's operating in San Francisco right now. You can pull up an app and have your Cruise self-driving car pick you up, take you to another location, and there's not a driver in it. There's no safety driver. I did this fairly recently with my wife, and
Were you afraid?
I wasn't. She was not real excited about it, to be honest with you. My wife is not, although she feels a lot better now, so that's the end of the story. We're jumping ahead of the story. So she was a little concerned about that, but we get in the car came up, we jumped in, and no driver in the car, and went through the streets of San Francisco, and lots of people. It was in the evening, too. They're allowed to operate only at night, so I think it was probably 11 o'clock at night that we were in the car. But it was smooth. We made the turns. It stopped for where there were so many kind of hazards. It was really a great ride. And then we got out, and what I thought was most interesting is that as we got out of the car, then we wanted to watch it as it went off to get its next customer who had called it up on the app. And it was, at that point, 11:30 at night or so it's dark. There was a car in front of us. We got out. The Cruise car went around. And then as soon as that car came out, a guy walked between the car, a pedestrian, right in front of the car, and it immediately slammed on its brakes. It was like instant, boom. And of course, the guy was startled. He looked and he saw a car with absolutely nobody in the car that just stopped instantly in front of him and then proceeded on his way. And then the car went off. And I'll tell you, I don't know if a human would have reacted that quick, especially 11:30 at night, the lighting, and who knows where they were, have been beforehand, who knows.
Yeah.
But that shows you that this technology is here, and let's seize that moment and start moving forward. But let people see what is actually there, and then go back to how we started this conversation from a safety perspective. It literally will save thousands of people's lives, as well as prevent debilitating injuries. So this is something that Congress needs to focus on, and we got to make sure people understand where we are.
All right, you mentioned jobs. Let's go to California right now. Has a bill that's working its way through the assembly there that would ban self-driving trucks. And the Teamsters are among the sponsors of this law. Understandably, they're worried about jobs. I have two questions. One, what do you think about truck driver jobs and how, what happens to those truck drivers? And two, should the states be allowed to pass individual laws, yay or nay, on this technology?
Well, there's some things that states would be involved in when it comes to actually on their roadways. So states have always had the ability to do that. But generally, we need to federalize as much as we possibly can to make sure this is national technology that goes across the roads all across
Trucks
the state.
go, long distance. They have to be able to
Absolutely.
drive in every state.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you can't make a delivery in California.
Right. So I think part of it is getting the kind of acceptance that people understand that this is actually helping folks, not only from a safety perspective, from an economic competitive standpoint, but the jobs issue is very real. So we have to take that with a great deal of seriousness, but also understand it's going to take some time. This is not something that overnight jobs are going to disappear. And I believe the jobs will just be different. They're going to look different than they are. Because this is really, to step back, this is a broader issue about the future of things like artificial intelligence. And we know that AI is a very disruptive technology, but it can also be an opportunity. But we have to think through that right now. I mean, we're looking at AI, and the Goldman Sachs study showed that 40% of legal work can be done by AI. So we're going to have lawyers that are going to be upset about that as well.
And journalists too.
And perhaps, yes, journalists as well. So this is a really important discussion that we're having right now. And it shouldn't be exclusively with autonomous vehicles. It should be broader in our economy and how it changes. Now, I'm not a job apocalypse guy that think that all the jobs are going to disappear and robots are going to be running the world. I don't think that's going to happen. But it'll be different. We'll have different jobs, and the power of human creativity will work with AI systems in order to produce even more productivity and have tremendous opportunities. But it is fraught with some challenges, and we should be very open-eyed about that and wide-eyed and understand that we're going to have to see how that transition will work for folks and make sure. You know, I think we're reminded of who was it that said, you know, in the long run, technology changes benefit everybody. But the problem is, in the long run, we're all dead. So the thing is, the short term is important too. What do we do in the short term to make sure that that person who will have a dislocation in their job has the opportunity, even though in the long run we're going to be just fine? Let's get through that period. And the challenge we have is this technology, not just cars, but everything is moving at an exponential rate. And as policymakers, we've not had a deal at an exponential rate. Many in the audience may know that Congress does not act in an exponential rate. We work very slowly, very deliberatively, and we're in a period where it's moving rapidly, which is why I think back to the AV legislation or rulemaking or whatever path we have to provide that kind of flexibility to understand that the technology is likely to move quicker than the regulation, but how do you create flexibility to allow some of that to occur while not sacrificing jobs, not sacrificing safety issues? Those issues are very real.
You know, you mentioned, though, the sort of move faster on regulatory issues. For 6 years now, I don't think there's been a confirmed NHTSA administrator, and President Biden just withdrew his nominee last week or the week before. How can any of this happen without leadership setting the tone at the top?
It's really hard. So we have to have a NHTSA administrator. There's just no question about it. I would hope that the Biden administration would put forward another candidate that they feel comfortable with and who can bring the kind of inspired leadership that we desperately need right now. And we'll take it up in the Senate, and I will work to confirm that individual as quickly as possible, because there's no question this is an impediment.
Absolutely. Well, we're just about out of time. I'm glad you shared your story about riding in Cruise's robotaxi out in San Francisco. Would you do it again?
Oh, absolutely.
Would your wife?
Yes, she would too. That was the test. She says she's
ready. She's a convert.
Yeah, she really is. And she would question me as I got involved in this back in 2017. She's like, "Really? Is this really gonna?" Like most people, is this really gonna happen? And then after the ride, she's like, "Okay, I'm open."
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time this morning. It was a
Thank you.
great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll head back out.
Up next, our View from the Top moderator and founder of Storyline, Chris Greats.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to Cruise for making this event possible. And I don't know about you, but I'm excited to get a look at that Cruise Origin Robotaxi just up the ramp there a little bit later this morning. But first, I'd like to welcome our next guest, who's going to give us a look at what's ahead for autonomous vehicles. So please welcome to the stage Cruise's Chief Legal and Policy Officer, Jeff Bleich. Jeff.
Thank you.
Welcome, Jeff. I am excited to talk with you because I think, like a lot of people, we want to get a look at this car. We want to understand what's coming next. And I want to start with autonomous vehicle production right here in the United States? Because it seems like it's a little bit of the Wild West right now. There's no central regulatory authority. And I'm wondering, are federal regulators providing the oversight that we need to grow this industry? Or do we risk ceding some ground to China here?
Yeah, no, I appreciated what Congressman Latta and Senator Peters just said, that the federal government actually needs to step up a bit. If you look at what other countries that have this capability are doing, it's very different from us. There are really only 2 countries that have the capacity to develop this technology based upon the number of technologists and also just the capital to do it, and it's China and the United States. We're actually well ahead technologically from China, but they have a plan. And they are working with a whole of government approach to advance that plan, and it includes not only building the AVs, but also developing satellite networks and developing EV-based manufacturing plants and everything else that will support that industry. I think they're also trying to make sure that they've got some entree into the U.S. markets, even if we don't let their vehicles operate here, using those satellites and batteries and other systems to essentially infiltrate the U.S. market for whatever purpose.
So we have a whole room of policymakers, of regulators here. I wonder, what advice do you have for them? How can they help?
Well, it's always hard to putt until the hole stops moving. So we need to know what the national direction is on this. I think the most important thing is first to give us the guidance that we need in terms of what is expected in order to build your own driverless vehicle. So, for example, we've got a purpose-built vehicle called the Origin, which you can see over there. It's a beautiful vehicle. It doesn't have a steering wheel. It doesn't have a brake pedal. It doesn't have an accelerator. It doesn't have side view mirrors or rear view mirrors. It doesn't have any of the things that a human driver would require. But the path is unclear to approvals for those. Do you really need to get certification that the vehicle can operate safely without sun visors? There's currently a cap on the number of vehicles you can make that are exempted from standard safety requirements. You can only make 2,500 a year for 2 years. Very hard to compete with Chinese industry if you can only make 5,000 vehicles in 2 years.
Right.
So what we really need is a well-developed path to developing purpose-built vehicles. And I also think we need a recognition that this is not just about one industry. It's really, it is a global competition over who is going to dominate the automotive industry. It's going to be a competition over the deployment of AI. This is probably the most significant deployment of AI commercially.
Right.
In terms of, we've all seen ChatGPT, but this is something that we all depend on. It's essential. We can't operate in this society without being able to get from place to place. And this will be the way that we do it in the future. So there'll be global standards that are set, and whoever is the leader in this space will set those standards. So if China is first to market, they'll be setting standards that the rest of us will have to live with.
And I want to ask you about that competition, because I wonder, what is Cruise getting right when it comes to this competition? What is your competitive advantage?
Well, we've got a couple of competitive advantages. I think the first one is we decided to pick the hardest place on earth to train our vehicles. So we went to San Francisco, which is the hardest driving environment, the hardest regulatory environment. We see some crazy things on the road every night. And we've now done 2 million miles fully driverless as a fared ride-hail service with passengers in the back seat paying for it, no one anywhere behind the wheel. 2 million miles without a serious injury collision. So part of that is being very serious about how we do this work. Part of it is testing in the hardest place, so you get better and better, faster and faster. Machines learn a little differently than the rest of us. But part of it is having an amazing partner in General Motors. So I think we're the only company that is paired up with a manufacturing partner that has 100 years of experience building vehicles. So we've established Factory Zero in Michigan, and it's it's going to employ over 2,000 people. It's going to support hundreds of millions more dollars in jobs and supply contracts for others. Everything we do is built here in America, and I think that gives us an advantage as well.
And I want to talk about that because you started in San Francisco, you've gone to Phoenix, Austin, and I wonder, as you expand, what are your biggest challenges and what is keeping this technology from going nationwide?
Yeah, no, we're and we just announced Houston and Dallas as well, so we're expanding rapidly. It's good to put this in perspective. When we started, it took us about 8 years to go from our first test on the road to being able to deploy a fully driverless ride. It took 8 years to get from that point in San Francisco. When we decided to go to Austin, it took 90 days to stand up an entire ride-hail service. So the scaling is here, the vehicles are here, they're just not equally distributed yet. The biggest challenge that we have now, I'd say the first one is, as an all EV fleet, you got to set up charging stations. And there is no, currently there is no national plan to how to support that. We're doing all of it ourselves, no taxpayer money involved. And setting up charging stations. The second thing is hiring. We need a lot of talented people to service these vehicles, to help with commercial operations, and also to support these EV charging infrastructure stations. And so getting the right hiring, I think, is critical. And then I think those are probably the two major challenges right now. I think the last one is just regulations. Every city has its own standards. We go through about 20 different permits in San Francisco to get to where we are. A lot fewer in Texas, but every city, every country, we're looking. We're in Dubai and Japan now too, as well, doing mapping. So. Everyone has different standards. I think we need to start working at a federal level to establish a national standard, which I think, if we do it right, will become a global standard, and it'll just make it much easier for this technology to develop.
And we have just a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure we hit on safety, because this is something that you and I were talking about.
Right.
And I'm curious, there are tens of thousands of Americans who are killed on the roads each year. We've heard that this morning, 40,000. Yeah. And I wonder, how much safer will AVs make our roads? And how do you guarantee that to a public that might be skeptical about getting into a car that doesn't have anybody behind the wheel?
Yeah. We've gotten so used to the status quo, and we just accept that 40,000 people have to die every year just for us to get around, just to get to and from work and get our kids to school and do all the other things. And that 400,000 more serious injury collisions happen, which fundamentally change people's lives forever with serious injuries. We just take that as like, oh, well, that's the cost of getting around. It doesn't have to be that way. There's an opportunity to really revolutionize our concept of mobility. It used to be, people thought if you built a skyscraper, if you built a bridge, 50 workers would have to lose their lives in the process. Now we're appalled by that idea. I think future generations will look back and be appalled by what we tolerated for so long until we got this technology. But we really can change it. In all those collisions that we were just talking about, in 95% of the cases, it's human error that's responsible.
Wow.
95, and that's a NHTSA statistic. So if you can improve the one feature that is responsible for most of the collisions, eventually you're going to be much, much safer. And you can see already, our vehicles are doing well, in part because they don't get drunk, they don't get distracted, they don't get tired. Right. Their capabilities don't degrade as they get older. In fact, they do just the opposite. They improve every day. When you improve one human driver, you don't necessarily improve anyone else. You improve, our software for one vehicle, you improve it for every vehicle.
Wow.
And you raise the standards. So it's inevitable that this will be safer and safer. But Senator Peters was talking about getting in with his. I put my kids in the car, so I mean that's that's faith, and it's based upon not just not just hope, but based upon data. We just published our report on our first 1,000,000 miles, and we measured frequency, severity, and accountability. You know,
Right.
who's responsible for every incident that happened on the road, and we also got Virginia Tech and we got University of Michigan to do a study of like how do humans,
Right.
or how are they performing over a 2 or 3 year period, and then we compared what we've done to human drivers, and in every dimension we're doing better than human drivers.
Wow.
In some cases 9 times better, for example, in accountability, but in every dimension better. And this is the dawn of this technology. So I've got great confidence in what this can do. The one other thing is it's not just safety, but it's accessibility.
Right.
I think about people with disabilities. There really is no solution for them today to get around. It's paratransit is not what it ought to be. The Origin has a ramp that will roll out and drop on a curb, and someone who is in a wheelchair will be able to just roll on and clip in. And for the first time in their lives, will be able to have a fully independent ride where they don't have to depend on any other human being to drive the vehicle or get them into the vehicle, and they don't have to listen to your music. They don't have to smell the sandwich that you're
Yeah,
eating.
exactly. Well,
Yeah,
I look forward to that future, and we have to, unfortunately, leave it there. Jeff Bleich is the Chief Legal and Policy Officer for Cruise. And Jeff, I look forward to you giving me a look at that Cruise Origin in a little bit here. Thank you so much for joining Axios.
Chris, thanks so much.
Welcoming back to the stage, Joanne Muller.
Well, I can't think of a better segue. We have talked a lot about policy this morning, but now we're going to talk about people and humans and why these vehicles matter. Accessibility is such an important issue. And I'm really delighted today because we have with us, please welcome to the stage, the National Disability Institute's Director of Health Equity, Elizabeth Lehman. Hi, Liz. Thank you. Well, they set us up really nicely here, I think, in the last conversation. I think that so many of us take transportation for granted.
We do.
I run out of my house, I jump in the car, I drive off. I don't think about what it's like if you have a disability or some limitation on transportation. And that's what I really want to dive in here with you. So tell me a little bit about your work and what you do for National Disability Institute.
Yeah, so NDI is focused on economic employment for people with disabilities and their families. And this is such a great population. It's about 20% of the US. Unfortunately, even though it's been 33 years since the Americans with Disabilities Act has passed, a large chunk of this population is still unemployed and living in poverty. And we don't want that. So that's sort of our mission. I'm in the health equity world. I come from public health. And I know that as a person with a disability, having a job can mean everything. People with disabilities want to save, they want to provide for themselves, their families, buy homes, personal vehicles even. And so when Cruise came to us with this question of what would it mean for a person with a disability to have access to an AV at any time, we were so excited to do the research. So I will pause there.
Tell me about the research then.
All right, I'll tell you about the research.
You did a big report into
We did a very
this.
big
Okay.
report. And the report was great. It was very long. Thank you for doing such a great short piece on it. So if you all want to read the
Smart
short.
brevity, Axios, that's what we do. Long report, short story.
Exactly. Please read it. But basically, we asked about 30 people from the community what it would mean for them to have an AV in their lives on demand. We also did a big literature review. We looked at the macroeconomic analysis with our friends at ICF. And we found out some crazy big numbers, and I'll list just a couple. So if AVs were adopted by people with disabilities nationwide, we could have 4.4 million more jobs for people with disabilities, and 9.2 million jobs altogether, so to support those additional jobs. And it would increase GDP 870 billion with a B in that first year, and 1.6 trillion increase for output. So I am told those numbers mean something to the economists of the world.
Not an
But
economist
to
yourself.
me,
Okay.
I am not an economist. I really care about the people.
Yeah.
And we had these incredible stories from 30 people with all different types of disabilities, everything from people who were blind, people who were deaf and used ASL, people who were wheelchair users, people with invisible disabilities, like traumatic brain injuries, autism, Down syndrome. And we got an amazing set of stories.
Well, so let's stop there for a minute. So I have an elderly aunt who has lost her vision, and she tells me she cannot wait for autonomous vehicles because her independence is at risk. So with an autonomous vehicle, how would a blind person interact with that? And how would they even know the vehicle has arrived? They're silent, they're electric.
They are. From my understanding, there's all sorts of things that are going to blend into existing assistive technology. For example, I believe Cruise is doing some research on how their app can be incredibly customizable, work with assistive technology like a screen reader if you were blind. So it would read to you on your phone, hey, your car is here,
Your car is arriving.
and potentially even give sort of feedback that you feel to find the vehicle. So I think there's all sorts of things in the works for that.
Now, we understand the Cruise has a nice ramp. Those doors open wide, that's all wonderful. But someone has to secure the wheelchair, let's say, into that vehicle or any vehicle.
Right.
How does that happen?
That's a great question.
Hasn't been answered yet?
It is, I understand it's in the works by Cruise, and I also understand that it would be great if the competition, anybody else who has a bent to technology also got involved in trying to solve this, because we have universal seatbelts. Why not have a universal sort of tie down? And you know, every body is different, every wheelchair is different, so I think it is in the works currently, but definitely tricky.
What are some of the other tricky issues?
Well, one of the groups I talked to was a couple, ASL users. They were deaf, and they wanted to know if Cruise and the competitors were currently thinking about making their app completely accessible in ASL because written English is their second language. So I found that kind of interesting as well. I don't know if that's in the works. I'd imagine there are groups working on it, but interesting.
Wow, okay, all right. So a lot of people are worried about jobs in, job elimination with autonomous vehicles. But I'm wondering, do you think it's necessary to have an attendant on an autonomous vehicle who can assist people with the tie down or with other, issues they may encounter while traveling?
That is another great question. I think one of the best parts of working with Cruise and seeing how they're doing things is that they are involving groups of people with disabilities very, very early in this process. Usually people with disabilities are last, right? They're an afterthought, and Cruise is sitting with them early, and how would you like to have this happen? So I don't think I can answer that, but I do know that Cruise is talking to people with disabilities and figuring out their preferred, because no one person is the same.
Right. What are some of the other issues that the people you spoke with encountered? I'm curious about developmental disabilities, for example, autism. Tell me some anecdotes of people you talked to.
So the disability community is incredibly gritty, and a lot of folks with disabilities are interested in starting small businesses and becoming entrepreneurs. So we talked to a handful of those. We actually allotted 1/3 of our interviews to that group. And one of the groups we talked to, sort of a mother-daughter dyad, the mother had created with her adult daughter who had Down syndrome a business because no one would hire her. And in doing that, she had to get to and from sort of a warehouse and storage facility every day. And at the time, the mom was driving. When I asked gosh, would it be better if you had an AV? The daughter was very excited about it. And I do think some of the younger folks we talked to were even more excited than some of the older folks. There was a little generational hesitation for the older folks. And the mother was excited too, because she said, gosh, I wouldn't have to drop everything to drive my daughter around. And she was very concerned about leaving her daughter with taxi drivers, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, because she was afraid they would take advantage. And we heard that from several people who worked with the community that had Down syndrome or autistic. And so that was a hard thing to hear, that they were constantly worried about their children, their adult children, their young children. And so the moms were really excited about AV, because if there's nobody in the car, there's nobody to potentially hurt their children. And the children were psyched to be able to be independent and go into work and see their friends. And so I think that population has a lot to gain from it.
Very interesting. Okay. What about inside an autonomous vehicle? What accommodations do you think are necessary to make sure that everyone has equal access and can use these vehicles?
Again, I think the customizability is going to be huge, and so many people with disabilities rely on their phones, and their phones are already useful to them and what they need. So if you can sync up on a phone and say, I don't want music, I do want AC, I do want to hear what's going on around me. For example, if it were a blind user, like, do I want to hear what I'm passing or do I not? I think all those pieces that can be customized would be huge, because the disability community is multifaceted. There's so many different people in there.
That's another thing that we don't appreciate, I think. We talk about the disability community as some unibody, and everyone has a story or a challenge, no matter, what your abilities. So what do you think, how will this research that you did inform the further development of autonomous vehicles? How do you see it helping?
Well, of the 30 people I had the pleasure of talking to directly, everybody was excited to try one of these vehicles out.
Have they had that chance yet?
And no, because they're only in a certain amount of cities right now, and the fully accessible origin is still being finalized. But they were so excited, and I think getting more of them on the road and allowing folks to try them and give feedback is going to be huge, and I hope that this report, gives a small light on a piece of the disability community and their opinions on how this would not only open up their employment options, but also their lives and their independence a little bit.
Right. You mentioned Cruise, I guess, was somehow a partner or something on your research, but I'm curious about other companies too, because obviously they're not the only company developing this technology. Have you heard from other companies, or is this on their radar? And how are they engaging?
It's a great question. So Cruise came to us, which was a big honor, and we were so pleased to work with them. Nobody else has come to us. We're here.
Why do you think that is? I mean, do you worry that the autonomous developers are not really thinking about accessibility as much as they might be about AI and safety?
I would say so. Again, the disability community is usually an afterthought. Do you know the muffin analogy?
No.
I know
What's
you've
the
been
muffin?
writing about technology for a long time.
Okay.
So the idea is you're a tech company and your tech is you're making muffins. So you make this incredible batch of muffins, they're plain muffins, and then you find out, oops, I was supposed to make blueberry muffins to comply with ADA and all the laws. Shoot, what am I gonna do now? So you cut a couple holes in the plain muffins and you shove in some fresh blueberries. That happens a lot, right? You take a piece of technology that's awesome, it's not working for people with disabilities, and you scramble to make it past the ADA and the web content accessibility guidelines, and it's legally there, but maybe not very user-friendly. So I'm pleased that at least Cruise started with, okay, we need blueberry muffins. It's gonna take us a little longer, but we're gonna put the blueberries in from the get-go. So I hope there are more companies thinking about that. I hope this becomes more of a conversation.
That is a fascinating analogy. I'm getting
I love
hungry now.
food, sorry.
No, but you know, it's having covered this industry for as long as I have. The excitement is about the technology and never about the people. And you know, like a lot of these companies, whether it's electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles, they're late in consulting the actual users of the technology. And in the case of disability, or people with disabilities, is even more so important. But you know, have you thought about things like, you know, specific curb cuts for autonomous vehicles where wheelchairs could access them? If it just pulls up to the curb, you know, how do they get in the vehicle? So what kinds of like infrastructure improvements do we still need?
Well, some of the folks I talked to for this project were asking, why is the money not going to making the metro more accessible or cutting more curb cuts or these infrastructure things? And I think it's a yes and situation. Like, yes, please put more money there. I would love to see the metro never have an elevator out, never have a friend of mine stuck on the platform because he or she can't get up in his wheelchair because the elevator's down, right? That would be great. The curb cuts would be great. But I think that's another discussion. I think it's going to dovetail really nicely, but there's maybe not enough political will around that right now.
Right, okay. Well, Liz, I really appreciate you bringing a lot of these issues to light for us. It's so important that we include, you know, just the human element to these conversations. The technology is really exciting. But,
Thank you so much.
So before we go, I just want to remind all of you that you can subscribe to my newsletter, which is Axios What's Next, at axios.com/newsletters. And you can sign up for all of our fabulous newsletters. And I also encourage you to spend a little time in the back, check out the vehicle that Cruz brought here today. You know, this thing is rare to have it in our presence, so definitely check it out. And I think that is it. Please stick around and network if you like. We're very happy that you're here today. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.